The question came up in interviews constantly once Louis Armstrong became famous in the late 1920s. When's your birthday, Satchmo? And Louis, who had never known the answer, who had grown up without birth certificates or official records, who had spent his childhood in New Orleans, never celebrating a birthday because no one could tell him when he was born, made a decision that revealed everything about how he understood himself and his place in America. July 4th, 1900, he'd say with absolute certainty, as if it were fact rather than choice, Independence Day, America's birthday. And from that moment forward, for the rest of his life, Louis Armstrong claimed July 4th as his own. Not because it was true, he had no idea if it was true, but because it was symbolically perfect. Because if you're going to invent your origin story, why not tie it to freedom itself? Why not make your personal beginning coincide with national independence? Why not claim the most American date possible for the most American art form's greatest practitioner? Louis Armstrong didn't just change his birthday. He chose an identity, declared himself American in the most fundamental way possible, by sharing a birth date with the country itself. And that choice, that act of self-creation, reveals more about Louis Armstrong's relationship with America, with identity, with belonging than any biography could capture, because the truth wasn't important. The meaning was, Louis Armstrong was born sometime in 1901, probably, maybe 1900, possibly late 1899. In the neighborhood called the Battlefield in New Orleans, one of the poorest, most dangerous areas of the city, where black families lived in conditions that made birth documentation seem irrelevant compared to daily survival. His mother, Mary Ann Mayan Albert, was 15 or 16 years old, unmarried, working as a prostitute to survive. His father, Willie Armstrong, was largely absent. The circumstances of Louis's birth were not the kind that generated official records. No hospital, no doctor, probably a midwife, possibly just Mayan alone or with neighbors helping, and definitely no one writing down the date. Mayan herself didn't know Louis's exact birthday. When Louis would ask as a child, and he did ask, because even poor children understand that birthdays matter, that knowing when you were born is part of knowing who you are, Mayan would shrug or guess or change the subject. Summer, sometime baby, hot day, maybe August, maybe July, don't rightly remember. The vagueness wasn't cruelty or neglect, it was reality. When you're 15 and giving birth in poverty without support in 1901 New Orleans, you're not thinking about documentation. You're thinking about survival. So Louis grew up without a birthday, watched other children celebrate, saw cakes and presents and special attention given to kids on their designated days. But Louis had no day, no annual marker of his existence. No celebration of the fact that he was alive and getting older and becoming himself. It's hard to overstate how foundational birthdays are to identity formation. They're the first piece of personal history most people know about themselves. The story of your birth, the day you entered the world, the beginning of your individual narrative. Louis didn't have that, had a gap where that foundation should be. As he got older, the absence started to matter in practical ways. When Louis joined his first professional bands in his late teens, bandleaders would ask for basic information. Name, address, age, and birth date. Louis would estimate, about 19, born around 1901, summer maybe. The imprecision marked him as someone from the margins, someone whose existence hadn't been documented, someone who didn't quite belong to the official world of records and dates and verified identities. But then Louis became successful. By the mid-1920s, he was making records, touring nationally, becoming known beyond New Orleans. And as his fame grew, so did the questions about his personal life. Journalists wanted biographical details. Record companies needed information for promotional materials. Fans were curious about the man behind the music and the birthday. Question kept coming up, when's your birthday? How old are you exactly? When were you born? Louis could have continued with vague answers. Sometime in 1901, but something about achieving success, about becoming Louis Armstrong rather than just Louis from the battlefield, made him want to claim something definite. If he was going to have a public identity, it should have a specific origin point, a moment when Louis Armstrong began. And if no one could tell him that moment, he'd choose it himself. The choice of July 4th wasn't random. Louis didn't just pick a date out of a hat. He chose Independence Day deliberately, symbolically, with full awareness of what it meant. July 4th represented everything Louis wanted to claim about his identity: American, free, independent, self-made. Jazz was American music. Louis was becoming Jazz's greatest practitioner, therefore Louis was quintessentially American, and what better way to declare that than to share a birthday with America itself? There's also a defiant edge to the choice that's easy to miss. Louis was a black man in America in the 1920s, 1940s, 1960s. He experienced constant racism, was denied hotel rooms, forced to use colored-only facilities, treated as inferior despite his fame and talent. The America that celebrated his music simultaneously denied him basic dignity, and yet Louis chose to identify himself completely with America by taking its birthday as his own. That's not naivete, that's claiming belonging in the face of rejection. That's saying, I'm American whether you want to acknowledge it or not. I'm so American I share the country's birthday. The symbolic power of July 4th as Louis's birthday also created a beautiful metaphor that Louis himself understood and articulated. Independence Day celebrates freedom. Louis's music was about freedom, musical freedom, emotional freedom, the freedom to improvise and create and express yourself without constraint. By making July 4th his birthday, Louis was declaring that he was born for freedom, that his existence and American independence were intertwined, that jazz and liberty were the same song. Louis also chose 1900 as his birth year rather than 1901, even though 1901 was more likely accurate. Why? Because 1900 was cleaner, a round number, the beginning of a century, the start of modernity. Being born in 1900 meant being born at the precise moment when the modern era began. It positioned Louis as a 20th century man from day one, someone whose entire life aligned with the modern age. Again, not random, deliberately symbolic. Once Louis made the choice, July 4th, 1900, he committed to it completely. From the 1920s forward, that was his official birthday. It appeared on all his documentation. Passports listed July 4th, 1900. Contracts listed July 4th, 1900. Promotional materials listed July 4th, 1900. Louis celebrated his birthday on July 4th every year. Received birthday wishes on July 4th, aged officially according to a July 4th, 1900 birth date. The invented date became real through repetition and commitment, and Louis never wavered, never admitted uncertainty. When asked about his birthday, he'd state it as fact. July 4th, 1900, born on Independence Day. How about that? The confidence was important, because if you're going to self-create, you have to fully inhabit the creation. Can't qualify. The chosen identity has to be claimed as absolutely as a given identity. Louis understood this, made July 4th, 1900 true by believing it completely. Lucille knew, of course. Louis, his wife, understood that the birthday was chosen rather than discovered. They'd had conversations where Louis explained his reasoning. She'd seen the inconsistencies in earlier records before Louis standardized on July 4th, but Lucille also understood what the date meant to Louis. The symbolism, the belonging, the self-creation, and she supported it, called it his birthday without qualification, celebrated it on July 4th, helped maintain the official story because she understood it wasn't a lie. It was a truth of a different kind, the truth of chosen identity. The July 4th birthday became part of Louis Armstrong's mythology. Journalists loved it, a jazz legend born on Independence Day. The symbolism was too perfect. Articles would mention it. Biographies highlighted it. The date became inseparable from Louis's public identity, and that was exactly what Louis wanted. The chosen birthday working as intended, creating meaning, establishing identity, claiming belonging, but there was also melancholy underneath the choice, because choosing your birthday means acknowledging you don't know your real one. Means accepting that fundamental piece of your identity is unknowable. Every July 4th celebration was also a reminder of what Louis didn't have, the true story of his birth, the real date, the verified beginning. He created a beautiful substitute, but it was still a substitute. Louis would sometimes reflect on this in private, wonder about the actual day he was born, what season it really was, whether Mayan had been telling the truth when she guessed August, whether he was actually 1901 or 1900 or even 1899. Those questions had no answers. The documentation didn't exist. Mayan had died without ever providing certainty. The true birthday was lost to history, to poverty, to the circumstances that made a black child's birth in 1901 New Orleans not worth recording. So the chosen birthday, July 4th, 1900, was both empowerment and loss. Empowerment because Louis got to decide his origin, got to create meaning where there was only absence, got to claim an identity that expressed who he wanted to be. but lost because the choice was necessary only because the truth was unavailable, because Louis's existence hadn't been deemed worthy of documentation, because he'd been born into circumstances that erased rather than recorded. The modern resonance of Louis's chosen birthday is profound. In 2026, we're living through an era where chosen identity is increasingly recognized and respected. Trans people choosing names and pronouns that align with their authentic selves. Adopted people choosing how to tell their stories. Immigrants choosing American names or keeping birth names. People choosing family, chosen family, rather than accepting biology as destiny. The idea that identity can be self-created rather than passively received is now mainstream in ways it wasn't when Louis made his choice. Louis Armstrong choosing July 4, 1900 as his birthday was early chosen identity. Self-creation before we had language for it. Louis understood something that we're only now broadly acknowledging, that you can be the author of your own story, that if the official narrative of your life is incomplete or wrong or unavailable, you can write a new one. That claiming identity isn't lying, it's surviving, it's thriving. It's insisting that you get to define yourself even when the world tried to leave you undefined. The symbolism of July 4th as chosen birthday also speaks to the complexity of Black American identity. Louis was undeniably American. Jazz is America's greatest cultural export, and Louis was jazz's greatest ambassador. But America treated Louis as second class, denied him dignity while celebrating his genius, loved his music while hating his skin. The contradiction was inescapable, and Louis's response, claiming the most American birthday possible, was both affirmation and critique. Affirmation, I belong here, this is my country, I'm American to my core. Critique, I have to claim this belonging because you won't grant it. I have to insist on my Americanness because you keep denying it. Every July 4th for the rest of his life, Louis Armstrong celebrated a birthday that was symbolically true and factually uncertain. Received well wishes and birthday cakes and recognition of another year of life beginning from a date he'd chosen rather than discovered. And every year that choice reaffirmed who Louis Armstrong was, someone who created his own identity, someone who claimed belonging through will rather than waiting for permission, someone who understood that sometimes the most honest thing you can do is choose the truth you need rather than accept the truth you're given. When Louis died on July 6, 1971, 2 days after his chosen 71st birthday, the proximity of death to birthday created a final symbolic moment. He'd celebrated his last birthday on July 4th, America's 195th birthday, Louis's 71st, and then 48 hours later he was gone. The symbolism writes itself. Louis Armstrong, born on Independence Day, died 2 days after Independence Day, his entire life bracketed by that most American holiday. The self-created origin story holding true to the very end. After Louis's death, researchers and biographers tried to determine his real birthday. Searched for documentation, interviewed people who might have known, examined census records and baptismal records and any paper trail that might exist. The consensus eventually settled around August 4, 1901 as most likely. Not July 4, 1900, August not July, 1901 not 1900, 1 month and 1 year off from Louis's chosen date. But here's what matters, the true date doesn't change anything. August 4, 1901 tells us when Louis was born. July 4, 1900 tells us who Louis chose to be. Both are important, both are real in different ways. One is biological fact, the other is identity truth. And for understanding Louis Armstrong, his relationship with America, his sense of self, his creative agency, the chosen date reveals more than the real one ever could. The story of Louis Armstrong changing his birthday is ultimately about power. The power to define yourself, the power to create meaning from absence, the power to claim belonging when it's denied. Louis didn't have a birth certificate, didn't have official recognition, didn't have documentation proving his existence, so he documented himself, created his own official beginning, made July 4, 1900 real through sheer force of will and repetition. That's not fraud, that's survival. That's taking control of the one thing you absolutely can control, your story about yourself. The world can deny you dignity, can refuse to document your birth, can treat your existence as inconsequential, but it can't stop you from claiming a birthday, can't prevent you from choosing when you began, can't take away your power to say, this is who I am, this is when I started, this is my origin story. Louis Armstrong chose July 4, 1900, made it official. Made it real, made it his, and in doing so, he didn't just pick a date. He declared independence from the poverty that didn't document his birth, from the racism that tried to deny his belonging, from the circumstance that tried to define him. He chose freedom, literally Independence Day, as his beginning, and lived that choice completely. The birthday. Choose when you don't know the birthday you were given. That's Louis Armstrong, self-created, symbolically perfect, defiantly American, born on Independence Day not by accident of biology but by choice of identity. The jazz legend who shares a birthday with America itself because he decided that's exactly what made sense. Because if you're going to be American music's greatest practitioner, why not be born on America's birthday? And if no one can tell you when you were born, why not choose the date that means what you want your life to mean? July 4th, 1900, Louis Armstrong's chosen birthday, not the date of his birth, but the date of his becoming. The moment when Louis decided who he was and claimed it completely. Independence Day, freedom's birthday, and Louis, by choice, by will, by the power to create your own truth. When the official truth is unavailable or insufficient, that's the story, not when Louis Armstrong was born, but when Louis Armstrong chose to be born, and why that choice tells us everything about identity, belonging, and the American story that Louis embodied whether America wanted to acknowledge it or not.